The drive home was supposed to take 3 days. I made it in 2. My brother's estate had settled faster than anyone expected, and by Thursday morning I was already loading the last box into my truck outside his house in Knoxville, shaking hands with the probate attorney and pointing the hood of my F-150 north toward Pennsylvania. I didn't call ahead. I figured I'd surprise my wife, maybe pick up flowers at the exit near our neighborhood, walk through the door with a bouquet, and watch her face light up the way it always did when I came home early from anything. 41 years of marriage, and that look never got old. I was thinking about that look when I turned onto our street at 9:30 in the evening and noticed the lights. Every single light in the house was on. I idled at the curb for a moment, engine running, staring at my own home. We lived in a modest, 2-story colonial in western Pennsylvania, the kind of neighborhood where people went to bed before 10 on a weeknight. Our neighbors had dark windows. Ours blazed like a stadium. Through the living room curtains, I could see shapes moving, silhouettes passing back and forth like shadows in a lantern. I turned off the engine. I sat in the dark truck. I counted 4 cars in my driveway that did not belong to anyone I recognized. A 5th was parked half on the lawn, tire tracks pressed into the grass I had reseeded in October. I got out of the truck quietly. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I had spent 32 years as a structural engineer, a man who assessed unstable buildings before deciding whether to enter them, and I applied the same professional stillness now. I walked up the front path and stood on the porch. The front door was unlocked. I could hear voices inside, the particular flat drone of people who have made themselves at home somewhere that is not their home. I pushed the door open. My living room was unrecognizable. The coffee table had been pushed against the wall. My wife's reading chair, the one she called her throne, was occupied by a young man I had never seen before, who had his shoes up on the armrest and a beer in his hand. There were takeout containers on the kitchen counter, 3 empty bottles of wine on the dining table, and someone had moved my wife's collection of ceramic birds off the shelf above the fireplace and stacked them carelessly in a corner. One of them was chipped. I stood in the doorway and absorbed all of this with the same cold precision I would have used standing in a compromised building, cataloging the structural failures before the whole thing came down. My son came out of the kitchen holding a plate of food. He stopped when he saw me. For a single moment, I watched his face run through a rapid sequence of expressions. Surprise. Something that flashed too fast to name. Then the practiced mask settled into place. The loose, easy smile he had worn his whole adult life like a costume. Dad. He said it like he had been expecting me. Hey, you're back early. I looked around the room. I looked at the strangers in my house. I looked at the takeout containers. I looked at my wife's chipped bird. Where is your mother? I asked. She's resting. He said it immediately, without hesitation, which told me it was prepared. She had a rough day. She asked not to be disturbed. I nodded slowly, and I turned and walked upstairs. He called after me. Dad, she's sleeping. Come have something to eat. You just got off the road. I was already at the top of the stairs. My wife has primary progressive multiple sclerosis. She was diagnosed 11 years ago, when she was 54. The disease had taken her walking first, then most of the fine motor function in her left hand, then the clarity of her speech on bad days. What it had not taken was her mind. Dorothy was sharper than anyone I had ever met, a former high school history teacher who could hold 4 arguments in her head simultaneously and win all of them. The MS made her body a prison, but she was still entirely herself inside it. I had hired a home health aide to be with her during the week I was in Knoxville, a woman named Patrice who came with impeccable references and who my wife genuinely liked. I had confirmed the arrangement with Patrice twice before leaving. I had also arranged for my son and his wife to check in on Dorothy every evening, just to be safe. The door to our bedroom was closed. I turned the handle and pushed it open. The smell reached me before the sight. It was the specific, unmistakable smell of a room that had been closed too long, of a person who had not been tended to in some time. Medical people would describe it clinically. I will not. I found the light switch by memory. The overhead light came on. Dorothy was on her side in the bed, facing the window. She was wearing the same floral nightgown she had been wearing when I left 6 days ago. Her silver hair was loose and tangled across the pillow. She was awake. I could tell from the tension in her shoulders the moment the light came on. Dorothy. I came around to her side of the bed. Her eyes found me. What happened to her face in that moment I will carry until I die. It was not relief first. It was shame. She was ashamed for me to see her like this. And the knowledge of that shame hit me harder than anything else I saw that night. I'm here, I told her. I'm right here. Her right hand reached toward me. I took it. Her lips were cracked and pale. The water glass on her nightstand was empty and bone dry. And when I ran my thumb across the inner rim, it left a faint dust line. It had been empty long enough to dry out completely. I sat on the edge of the bed. I kept my voice very steady. How long? I asked. She blinked. A tear moved sideways across her temple into her hair. She held up 2 fingers on her right hand. 2 days? I asked. She blinked once. I stood up. I went to the bathroom and filled a clean glass with water. I brought it back and helped her drink slowly, supporting her head, watching her swallow. She was careful, deliberate. She had been waiting to do exactly this. I got her another glass. When she had drunk enough, I sat back down beside her. I touched her cheek gently. I asked her, "Where is Patrice?" She shook her head. Her expression told me that Patrice was not a part of whatever had happened here. I asked, "Did your daughter-in-law send Patrice away?" Dorothy closed her eyes. Then she opened them and looked at me with absolute clarity. She held up 3 fingers. 3 days, I said. 3 days ago. She blinked once. I squeezed her hand. I stood up. I went to the window and looked out at the backyard. The yard I had built a patio in the summer before her diagnosis. The yard where we had planted a garden together every spring for 30 years. I was very calm. It was the kind of calm that sits at the bottom of something too deep and too hot to be anger. Something older and more patient than that. I heard footsteps on the stairs. My son appeared in the doorway. He looked at me. He looked at his mother. Something shifted in his face, but it wasn't remorse. It was calculation. "She needs rest, Dad," he said. "She's been sleeping most of the day." Heather checked on her this afternoon. Heather was his wife, a licensed pharmacist who had worked at a hospital for the past 8 years and knew more about medication and human biology than most people I had ever met. I turned around slowly. The water glass in my hand was still half full. "She hasn't had water in 2 days, I said. He blinked. His jaw shifted. "That's not she had water. Heather left a glass this morning." I held up the glass from the nightstand, the one I had refilled myself. I pointed to the bathroom. Then I pointed to the bed. "Your mother cannot walk," I said. "She cannot refill her own glass. Someone has to do it for her. Someone has to check on her. Someone has to give a single damn whether she lives or dies." He spread his hands. "Dad, we're not nurses. It's a lot of responsibility. She can be a lot to handle." I set the glass down on the nightstand. I walked past him out of the bedroom. I walked downstairs. I opened the front door. I stood on the porch in the cold November night, and I called 911. The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes. My son stood in the living room doorway watching them come in, his plate of food still in his hand. His guests had scattered toward the kitchen. I heard someone leave through the back door. I rode with Dorothy to the hospital. I held her hand in the back of the ambulance while a paramedic checked her vitals, and another radioed ahead to the emergency room. I listened to the numbers they reported to each other, and I stored them the way I had always stored data that mattered, precisely and permanently. In the waiting room, my son and his wife arrived 20 minutes after we did. She was dressed differently than she had been when I passed through the house. She had changed clothes quickly. She was wearing her professional expression, the one that said competent and concerned and in control all at once. She had been a pharmacist for 12 years. She knew how to stand in a hospital corridor and look like she belonged there. They sat across from me in the waiting area. We did not speak for a long time. When the doctor came out, his name was on his badge, Dr. Okafor. He was a compact, serious man with the particular economy of movement that comes from spending 20 years in emergency medicine. He looked at the three of us, and I watched him read the room with the same professional speed I used to read a building. He spoke to me. Mr. Peterson, your wife is stable. We have IV fluids running. Her pressure is coming up. But I need to discuss her presentation with you. I stood. My son stood a half-second later. Dr. Okafor looked at his chart. Her sodium levels indicate severe hypernatremia consistent with prolonged fluid deprivation. He paused on those last two words deliberately. Not hours, days. He looked at me. Was she refusing to drink? No, I said. She was not able to access water because her caregiver was absent. My son made a sound. Dad, that's not. I looked at him. He stopped. Dr. Okafor continued. We also found elevated levels of benzodiazepines in her blood work. She has no current prescription for any benzodiazepine on file. The room felt very quiet. My daughter-in-law crossed her arms. She tilted her head slightly. That's likely residual from an older prescription, doctor. She had a sleep medication script about 14 months ago. It can persist in the system of someone with limited mobility. Dr. Okafor looked at her. And you are? Her daughter-in-law, licensed pharmacist. He nodded once, the way professionals nod at each other when they are deciding what credit to extend. The level we found is not consistent with residual elimination, he said. It is consistent with a recent administration. My daughter-in-law smiled tightly. That seems unlikely. I'm sure there's another explanation. We'll determine that through further testing, the doctor said. He returned his attention to me. Mr. Peterson, I'm required to notify Adult Protective Services given the circumstances of her presentation. I want you to be aware of that. Good, I said. She turned toward me. Gerald. Her voice was low and controlled. Let's not do this. Let's not make this into something it isn't. We were trying to manage a difficult situation. You left without adequate backup care arrangements. Patrice had a family emergency. We did our best. She was testing the narrative, laying it out like a first draft to see if it would hold. Patrice had a family emergency. We were covering. We did our best. Short words. Simple. Easy to repeat. I sat back down in the plastic chair. I crossed my legs. I said nothing. My son sat down beside her. He leaned toward me. Dad, listen. This looks bad, I know. But if APS comes in and starts investigating, it's going to come back on you too. You're her primary caregiver. You left her with us for a week, and you didn't have a backup plan. You want that on the record? You want them looking at your home? I looked at him. He had his mother's eyes, a dark, warm brown, and I had spent 35 years being grateful for that. It felt like a theft now, those eyes and that face. Heather touched his arm and leaned toward me. She kept her voice gentle. Gerald, we love Dorothy. We love her. This was a communication breakdown, nothing more. And we can fix it together if we just stay calm and stay on the same page. She paused. But if you push this, if you involve lawyers and investigators, it becomes adversarial. And in an adversarial situation, people say things they can't unsay. Things about a husband who travels, while his disabled wife stays home. Things about a home where a woman has a fall history and lives in a 2-story house. She smiled, very slightly. You understand? I understood perfectly. She was a pharmacist and he was a licensed real estate agent. They were not stupid people. They had thought about this conversation, probably more than once. I let my shoulders drop. I rubbed my face with my hands. I let my voice get thin and tired. I don't want any trouble, I said. I just want her to be all right. My son put his hand on my back. That's all we want too, Dad, he said. We're on the same team. I stared at the linoleum floor and nodded slowly. I drove home alone at 2 a.m. The guests were gone. The house was quiet. The takeout containers were still on the counter. I walked through every room slowly, looking with different eyes than I had used when I came through the door 3 hours ago. I looked like a man building a case. I was a structural engineer for 3 decades. My entire profession was the science of finding hidden failures, the crack behind the drywall, the rot inside the beam, the corrosion in the joint that looked solid from the outside but was hollow at its core. I knew how to look for things that had been concealed. I went to the kitchen first. I found a week's worth of takeout bags in the recycling bin. Not just from the past few days, from the days before. I counted them. 7 different restaurants over 6 days. They had not cooked a single meal in my house while I was gone. They had not been living here temporarily. They had moved in. I went to the small office off the hallway where I kept my financial files. The desk drawer was slightly ajar in a way I never left it. I opened it fully. The files were in the wrong order. Someone had been through them. I went upstairs to the bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed where my wife had lain for 2 days without water, and I looked at the room with clinical precision. The medical equipment in the corner had not been touched. The portable suction device, the positioning wedges, the specialized call button I had installed on the headboard within Dorothy's reach. The call button. I crossed the room. I picked it up. It had been switched off. It was a simple toggle on the base unit, a small physical switch. Someone had flipped it off. Dorothy could not have done it herself. Her fine motor function on her left side was gone, and the switch was on the left side of the base. She could not have reached it. I put the switch back to the on position. I stood there for a long time holding it. Then I went to the small router on the bookshelf. I had installed a home network 18 months ago that ran the thermostat, the security cameras at the front and back doors, and a discrete monitoring app on my phone that my son and daughter-in-law both knew about and had both agreed to. What they did not know was that the thermostat had an internal log function I had set up myself, a detailed record of every temperature change, every scheduled adjustment, every manual override. Data logged to a cloud account with a password that existed only in a notebook in a lockbox in the garage. I went to the garage. I got the notebook. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and I logged in. The thermostat log told me that the heat in the master bedroom had been manually lowered to 61 degrees on Monday evening and had not been adjusted since. The rest of the house had stayed at 72. They had been comfortable downstairs, while the temperature in my wife's room dropped to the point that prolonged exposure would accelerate dehydration and suppress the immune system. In someone with MS, in someone with Dorothy's particular vulnerabilities, 61 degrees over 4 days was not an inconvenience. It was a clinical risk. I printed the log. I date-stamped the printout. I placed it in a folder. I looked at the security camera footage from the front door. I found Patrice leaving on Monday afternoon. She stopped on the porch and turned back to look at the house as if she had forgotten something, then turned away and walked to her car. She had the specific body language of someone who had been told to leave and was uncertain whether she should. I watched her sit in her car for 3 minutes before she drove away. Then I watched my daughter-in-law close the front door. I screenshot the timestamp and added it to the folder. I pulled up my bank's online portal. I had left a separate household account for expenses while I was in Knoxville, a joint account that both my son and his wife had access to by arrangement for emergencies. The balance had been $4,000 when I left. The current balance was $211. I scrolled through the transactions. There was the grocery run I had anticipated. That was fine. There were the restaurant charges I had expected less of. And then there were the charges I had not expected at all. A hotel booking at a resort in Ohiopyle for 2 nights. A spa visit, a winery, a boutique I did not recognize in a town 30 miles south. All over 5 days. While my wife lay upstairs at 61 degrees, with the call button turned off, I sat back in my chair. I thought about what my daughter-in-law had said in the hospital. Things about a husband who travels while his disabled wife stays home. I thought about the timing. I thought about a conversation we'd had in September, my son and I, when he had mentioned casually that a colonial in our zip code had sold for $312,000 and the market was still moving. I had changed the subject. He had pressed it gently. "Dad, you and Mom are in a 2-story house and her mobility is only going to get worse. Have you thought about downsizing? A 1st-floor unit somewhere. I could help you list the property. It would be no trouble." I had told him we were happy where we were. I thought about that conversation now with the thermostat log open on my screen. I thought about what it would take to establish that a man in his mid-60s was no longer capable of caring for his disabled wife independently. A hospital visit, a documented incident of neglect, an APS report, a concerned son and his credentialed wife stepping in to assume guardianship, temporarily, just until things settled. I thought about the house, $312,000. I was not going to sleep tonight. That was clear. I closed the laptop. I went to the living room. I picked up my wife's ceramic bird from the corner where they had stacked them, the chipped one. I set it carefully back on the shelf above the fireplace. Then I set the others back, one at a time. I called Patrice at 7 in the morning. She answered on the second ring. She was not difficult to reach, and she was not evasive. She told me everything in a single unbroken account, with the patient clarity of a woman who had been waiting for this call. My daughter-in-law had phoned her Monday morning while I was still on the road in Virginia. She had told Patrice there had been a change of plan, that a family member had arrived to help, and her services were no longer needed for the week. She had asked Patrice to keep the change confidential because Gerald worries, and there's no need to alarm him over a simple schedule shift. Patrice had felt uncomfortable. She had nearly called me. She had talked herself out of it. When she finished, I thanked her and asked her to write down exactly what she had just told me, time, date, and content of the call, and to send it to an email address I gave her. She said she would do it within the hour. She did. My next call was to a lawyer named Sylvia Marsh, who had been my attorney for property matters since 1999. I had her cell number because we had been through a boundary dispute with a neighbor once that required weekend phone calls, and she had never seemed to mind. Sylvia picked up at 7:45. I talked. She listened. When I stopped, she was quiet for 4 seconds. "Gerald," she said, "who else knows?" "No one who's on my side," I said. "Then let's keep it that way for now. Do not confront them directly. Do not tell them what you have." She paused. "I need you to understand something before we talk about next steps. What you're describing, if it's as documented as you say, is not just a civil matter. This is criminal." "I know," I said. "Elder abuse, financial exploitation, unauthorized medication administration, the benzodiazepines alone." She paused again. "Did you sleep?" "No. Go to the hospital. Sit with your wife. Let them see you being the devoted husband. And Gerald," she kept her voice even, "does your son have access to any of your financial accounts beyond that household card?" I thought about it. I thought about the joint account we had added him to 4 years ago for convenience, to help with deposits when I was on job sites. I thought about the signature card at the bank. I said, "Possibly more than I realized. Check. Today. Before you do anything else." I showered. I changed clothes. I drove to the hospital. Dorothy was in a room on the second floor by then, no longer in the emergency ward. She had color in her face. The IV had done its work through the night. When I came in, she was awake, watching the door, and the look she gave me when I appeared in it was the one I had been thinking about on the drive home from Knoxville. Not the shame this time, the other one. I sat beside her and held her hand, and we stayed like that for a long while, without needing anything else. My son and his wife came in at 10:30. He was carrying coffee in a bag from the bakery Dorothy liked. He was very good at this. He had always been very good at this. They stayed for 40 minutes. They were attentive and warm and careful in all the right places. My daughter-in-law spoke to the nurse who came in to check Dorothy's levels with the fluent authority of someone who understood the medical vocabulary, and the nurse responded in kind. I watched my wife watch her daughter-in-law, and I saw the thing that had replaced fear in Dorothy's eyes. It was a very still, very contained kind of hatred, the kind that lives in someone who has been powerless long enough to know that expression is a luxury they cannot afford. When they left, I leaned close to Dorothy and asked very quietly, "Was it her who gave you something? The medicine that wasn't yours?" She closed her eyes, opened them, blinked once. "How many times?" I asked. She held up 4 fingers. I sat with that. 4 times over 6 days. Enough to keep her quiet and compliant. Enough to suppress her appetite and her ability to call for help. Enough that she would seem confused if anyone did check on her. Enough that if she died, it might look like a complication. A system already compromised by disease and years of medication. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing that would make a careful pharmacist uncomfortable. I went to the bank at noon. My account manager had worked at that branch for 11 years. He knew Dorothy and me by name. He printed the last 30 days of activity across all accounts associated with my name without my having to explain much beyond the fact that I believed there had been unauthorized access. He was quiet for a long time, looking at what he had printed. He slid the pages across the desk to me. My son had added himself as a co-signatory to my primary account 17 months ago. I had signed the authorization myself. I had done it without reading it carefully, in the middle of a difficult stretch, when Dorothy had been hospitalized for 4 days, and I had been managing everything alone, and my son had offered to help with bills while I was at the hospital. I had signed what he put in front of me. He had used that access in the past 3 weeks to make 4 transfers. Together they totaled just over $26,000. The destination was an LLC I did not recognize, Crestfield Holdings. When I asked the manager to look it up, he found it listed in the Pennsylvania State Registry with a registered agent who was my son's business partner. I sat with that information the way I used to sit with a bad engineering report. I did not react immediately. I absorbed it. Then I asked the manager to freeze everything, to block all external transfers, to require my in-person presence for any transaction over $500, to flag the account for fraud review and prepare a written record of the unauthorized access going back to the first transfer. He said it would be done by close of business. I drove back to Sylvia's office with the bank records and the thermostat log and Patrice's written account and the screenshot of the call button. I sat across the desk from her and watched her read through everything with the focused attention of someone building a structure from the ground up. She took her glasses off when she finished. "Gerald," she said, "this is organized. This is not opportunistic negligence. This is a plan." "Yes," I said. "The LLC transfers. The guardianship angle they're setting up with the APS report. The medication." She set the papers down. "They are building a case that you are incapable of caring for Dorothy so that they can petition for legal guardianship. Once they have guardianship, they control her medical decisions and her placement. And once you become the documented problem rather than the caregiver, the next step is having you assessed, having your financial decision-making questioned." She paused. "If they could get you declared incompetent, even temporarily, the house becomes a guardianship asset." $312,000, I said, "plus whatever is in the accounts." She looked at me steadily. "How long do you want to wait before we move on this?" "Long enough for them to show me everything," I said. She nodded slowly. "They think they have control of the situation right now. They think the APS report frames the narrative in their favor. They will likely try to use it to accelerate the guardianship petition. That requires them to file. And filing is a public, documented action. Let them file, I said. She picked up her pen. Then let's prepare a response they won't be expecting. I drove back to the hospital in the late afternoon. I spent 3 hours with Dorothy. I told her everything in a low, even voice, because she deserved to know, and because keeping her in the dark would have been a second betrayal. She listened with the complete stillness she had developed over years of managing a body that did not cooperate, a stillness that I had always mistaken for patience, and now understood was something closer to discipline. When I finished, she reached out and gripped my hand with her right one. She held it hard. "We'll be all right," I told her. "Both of us." She held tighter. 3 days later, the APS visit happened. A caseworker named Miss Delgado came to the hospital room while I was present. She was professional and thorough. She took notes. She asked Dorothy questions, patient ones, and my wife answered them in the slow, deliberate way she communicated now. Single words and nods, and occasional full sentences when the idea was important enough to fight for. Miss Delgado was the kind of person who listened to all of it. She also spoke to the doctor. She also reviewed the admission records. She asked to see the thermostat data. She asked to speak to Patrice. I gave her everything in a folder Sylvia had organized. When she spoke to my son and daughter-in-law separately, I was not in the room, but Sylvia was outside with a letter that documented the unauthorized bank transfers and the LLC registration and the timeline of Patrice's dismissal. The caseworker called me that evening. She did not make determinations over the phone, she said, but she wanted me to know that the investigation was expanding and that Dorothy would remain under protective monitoring during its course. My son called me 20 minutes after that. His voice was very different now. The easy warmth was gone. What I heard underneath it reminded me of when he was 9 years old and had been caught in a lie and was calculating in real time whether doubling down or retreating was the better option. "Dad, I think we need to talk," he said, "about all of this, just the two of us." I said, "That sounds reasonable. Come to the house tomorrow morning." He came alone. Heather stayed away, which told me she was smarter about the situation than he was. He sat at the kitchen table, where I had sat 3 nights earlier, looking at the thermostat log. He was dressed casually, trying to project informality. Gunnays, a family discussion between adults. He started carefully. He talked about how hard the last year had been, about how concerned he was about my ability to manage Dorothy's increasing needs alone, about how he had only been trying to help, to protect both of us, to make sure we had options. I let him talk for 7 minutes without interrupting. I watched him find his footing, relax slightly into the narrative, and I watched the moment he decided the ground was firm enough to try something bolder. "Dad," he said, "the house is the problem. It's too big for your situation. If we could just agree to list it, to use that capital to set Dorothy up in a proper facility with real, around-the-clock care, you wouldn't have to manage all of this alone. You could visit her every day. You could rest." He paused. "I could handle the listing, the whole thing. You wouldn't have to do anything." I looked at him for a long time. "Tell me about Crestfield Holdings," I said. He went completely still. $26,000, I said. 4 transfers over 3 weeks. Your business partner's name on the registration. He opened his mouth. He closed it. I pulled out the folder Sylvia had prepared and set it on the table between us. The bank records were on top. He looked at them. He looked at me. He looked at the folder. "That was for expenses," he said. "For covering costs while you were away. I was going to account for all of it." The thermostat log was next. I set it on top of the bank records. 61 degrees. Master bedroom only. 4 days. He pushed back from the table slightly. "The call button," I said. "The one your mother uses to signal for help. Someone switched it off. She has no use of her left hand. She couldn't have done it herself." "Dad, the benzodiazepines," I said. 4 administrations. Your wife is a licensed pharmacist with access to that class of medication and the knowledge to dose it in a way that would suppress response without triggering an obvious overdose in someone with Dorothy's existing prescriptions. He stood up. His chair scraped the floor. "You can't prove any of that." "I can prove enough," I said. "And so can the Adult Protective Services caseworker and the doctor who documented the presentation, and Patrice, who has put in writing exactly what your wife told her on Monday morning." His face had changed completely. The mask was gone. Underneath it was something I did not recognize and did not want to look at for too long. "You want to destroy this family," he said. His voice was low and rough. "For what? A house? You're choosing a building over your own son." I stood up too. I was 64 years old and I had spent 30 years climbing structures that were trying to fall on me, and I was not afraid of a man half my age who had mistaken my patience for weakness. "You made a calculation," I said. "You decided your mother's life was worth less than what you could get for this house. You had a plan and a partner and a timeline, and you needed one thing from me, which was for me to not come home early." I looked at him. "I came home early." He stared at me. "I want the $26,000 back," I said. "I want your name off every account associated with mine. I want you to withdraw whatever you have submitted or plan to submit regarding guardianship. And I want you to understand that whether or not you do any of those things does not change what the district attorney does with the information Sylvia Marsh is delivering to them this morning." He went white. Sylvia had filed the criminal referral at 9 a.m. I had known before he walked through the door. I had let him come because I wanted him to understand that there was no version of this conversation where he left with anything. He left without speaking another word. He walked out of my kitchen and down my front path and got into his car and drove away. I stood at the window and watched him go. Dorothy came home 3 weeks later. We converted the dining room into a bedroom on the first floor and built a roll-in shower in what had been the half bath off the hallway. I hired Patrice back at a rate that made her cry a little. I installed a proper medical alert system with redundant call functions and a monitoring center. I changed every account password, every PIN, every access code, to everything. Sylvia's referral produced results in a timeline I had not fully anticipated. The district attorney's office moved quickly on the benzodiazepine administration. That was the charge that carried the most weight, the medical component, because it transformed the input narrative from family negligence into something with intent. My daughter-in-law surrendered her pharmacy license 8 days before her arraignment. My son's real estate license went into suspension pending the fraud investigation. The LLC transfers produced a wire fraud charge on top of the elder abuse charges. I did not attend the hearings. Sylvia went. She called me after each one with a summary delivered in the dry, efficient language of someone who has been in courtrooms long enough to stop being surprised by what people do to each other. My son received 4 years. My daughter-in-law received 6, longer because of the medical component and the professional violation. The judge noted in sentencing that the systematic nature of the planning and the particular vulnerability of the victim placed this beyond the category of a family dispute gone wrong. I was sitting on the porch when Sylvia called to tell me. It was early March, cold and bright, the kind of Pennsylvania morning that makes you feel like something is about to start again. Dorothy was inside in her new first-floor room, and I could hear through the window the sound of Patrice talking to her, the low, even murmur of someone who genuinely enjoys the person they are taking care of. Sylvia told me the numbers. I thanked her. I sat for a while after we hung up, watching a pair of starlings work over the bare yard. 41 years. That is how long Dorothy and I have been married as of this spring. We spent the first 10 of them planning a future that looked nothing like what we got. We spent the middle years building something real and sometimes hard and always ours. And we have spent the last 11 navigating a disease that took the future we planned and handed us something narrower and more essential instead, the daily fact of each other. She cannot walk. She cannot always speak. There are days when the disease takes most of what she has and leaves her with very little to work with, and she uses that very little with a stubbornness that I have loved longer than I can properly remember. My son made a bet that I was too tired, too distracted, too trusting to protect her. He was not entirely wrong about the tired part. He was not entirely wrong about the trusting part. A man who has built his life on a foundation of loyalty finds it hard to look for termites in his own floor. But I came home early. I want to say that to anyone listening who is in this with someone who is doing the long work of caring for a person they love, who is trusting the people around them to hold up their end. Check the thermostat. Check the accounts. Check the call button. Not because your family is made of the same material as mine, but because the people who mean us harm have always known that love makes us look in the wrong direction. I go to the grocery store now, on Tuesday mornings. I pick up the things Dorothy likes, the good sparkling water she prefers, the specific crackers, the dark chocolate that her doctor has decided is acceptable in moderation. I come home and I put everything away, and then I sit beside her and we watch whatever she wants to watch. And we argue sometimes about the historical inaccuracies in whatever period drama she has chosen, and she wins most of the arguments, because she usually knows more than I do, and she has always known it. It is a small life now in some ways. It is also the most honest version of the life I have been building for 4 decades, stripped of everything that turned out not to be load-bearing. She is here. I am here. That is the structure that holds. If this story meant something to you, if it made you think about the people you are responsible for, or the people who are responsible for you, hit the like button and subscribe to Arcane Vengeance, where justice is the only thing we deal in. Tell me in the comments, would you have seen it coming? Because I almost didn't. And that is the part that I think about most. Not what they did, but how close they came to getting away with it.